We're used to seeing her draped in diamonds and silk, the quintessential Hollywood diva. But forget that image. Ava Gardner was a force of nature. When America's richest and most powerful man, billionaire Howard Hughes, tried to hold her by force, she silently cracked his skull with a heavy ashtray. When the legendary Frank Sinatra put a gun to his head to stop her from leaving, she dismissed him with icy contempt, calling him pathetic. Studio bosses hated her so much they marketed her to audiences with the insulting tagline, "The most beautiful animal in the world." And she embraced it, proving that predators don't follow rules. Today, we'll strip away the gloss from the most toxic and passionate woman of the 20th century and discover how a poor girl from a tobacco farm brought Hollywood to its knees. Night in Palm Springs. A convertible races down an empty road. At the wheel is the world's most famous singer, Frank Sinatra. Beside him, the most beautiful woman in the world, Ava Gardner. They're both intoxicated, both furious, and both armed. They shoot out streetlights one by one until the street is swallowed by darkness. Then they return to the hotel, and an hour later, neighbors hear the shattering of glass and blood-curdling screams. This isn't a scene from a noir detective story. This was their typical weekend. Ava Gardner's story is often spun as a glossy tragedy. Oh, what a beauty, such a shame she faded away in empty mansions. But that's a lie, a simplification for those too afraid to face the truth. Ava Gardner wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was a natural disaster. A woman whose pathological need for freedom destroyed anyone who tried to cage her, be it a husband, a producer, or dictator Franco. Act 1. Roots of Rebellion. Tobacco, clay, and the stain of poverty. To grasp why Ava Gardner always felt like an outsider in Hollywood's world of crystal and velvet, you need to feel the earth beneath her first steps. Most biographies kick off with a glossy photo in a New York window. That's a mistake. Ava didn't start in New York. She began in a place barely on the map, Grabtown, North Carolina. Her character, untamed, raw, almost masculine in its bluntness, wasn't shaped by MGM screenwriters, but by the Great Depression, the smell of dried tobacco, and the humiliating label, "poor white trash," that haunted her family. Ava Gardner despised snobbery because she grew up at the bottom of the South's social ladder. Her entire life became a struggle to prove that a girl who walked barefoot through manure had the right to look kings in the eye without flinching. Ava Lavinia Gardner was born on December 24, 1922. She was the seventh and last child of farmers who grew tobacco and cotton. This wasn't the pastoral poverty romanticized in books. It was a harsh, dirty fight for survival. Her father, Jonas Gardner, was a man of the land, but when Ava was just 2, disaster struck. The barn with their tobacco crop and the cotton gin burned down. The family lost everything: land, home, livelihood. From respected farmers, they instantly became hired hands, drifting from place to place. Ava's mother, Molly, had to manage a boarding house for teachers, then for workers. Picture this: a little girl growing up in a house full of strange men, the smell of cheap food, hard labor, and a constant fear of tomorrow. Here, Ava learned her first language. It wasn't Shakespeare, it was survival. Strong curses, standing her ground, and zero illusions. Ava's childhood soaked in physicality. While future rivals like Grace Kelly learned piano in white gloves, Ava ran barefoot through fields, her soles tough as boot leather. She could wring a chicken's neck, help birth a calf, or punch a boy who dared tease her. At school, they mocked her cruelly. For her poverty, her clothes sewn from sacks, and especially her accent. That southern drawl, thick as molasses, as foreign as another language. She grew up with a deep inferiority complex. She thought herself stupid. Books were rare in their home. The only one read aloud was the Bible. But this poverty had a flip side: absolute freedom. Ava Gardner absorbed the wild beauty of the South. She wasn't afraid of dirt. She wasn't afraid of hard work. She wasn't afraid of others' opinions because there was nowhere lower to fall. This groundedness became her greatest asset and curse. Later in Hollywood, when producers tried to mold her into an aristocrat, the mask cracked. Ava couldn't fake daintiness. If she disliked someone, she'd tell them straight to their face, using the same language she heard from the workers at her mother's boarding house. One biographer noted a crucial detail. Ava Gardner always preferred the company of lighting techs, drivers, and makeup artists over producers and stars. Why? Because with ordinary people, she felt safe. They smelled like her childhood, tobacco, sweat, and honesty. And people in tuxedos reminded her of those who once looked down on her family when they lost the farm. We're used to seeing Ava Gardner in diamonds and furs, but to understand her psychology, remember, inside this goddess lived a scared but proud girl from Grabtown who vowed no one would ever make her feel second-rate again. Her beauty bloomed not because of care, but despite the odds. It was the beauty of a wildflower breaking through asphalt, bright, strong, and utterly untamed. Yet this wildness lay hidden for a time. Ava grew up, became a stunning young woman, but she didn't realize her own beauty. She prepared to become a secretary, marry some clerk, and live a quiet life. Fate had other plans. A trip to New York to visit her sister set off a chain of events that uprooted this wildflower and transplanted it into Hollywood's plastic greenhouse. And there, in that greenhouse, began the strangest experiment in film history, trying to make a silent movie in the age of sound. Act 2. Silent film in the age of sound. How a mistake became a legend. We leave the dusty fields of North Carolina for the neon glow of New York and the blinding spotlights of Los Angeles. This is a clash of civilizations. To grasp Ava's tragedy, you must understand what MGM was in '41. It wasn't just a film company, it was a totalitarian aesthetic empire. Louis B. Mayer, its head, was a dictator who believed stars weren't born, they were manufactured. The system operated like a flawless conveyor belt. An ordinary girl with flaws, insecurities, and a past entered one door, and a goddess emerged from the other, with a new name, a new biography, fixed teeth, and a wiped memory. Ava Gardner was the most beautiful and flawed raw material ever fed into this machine. Her success story is a series of mistakes that should never have worked in the rational world of business. It all started with a photograph, taken not for fame, but for a family album. At 18, Ava visited her older sister Beatrice in New York. Her sister's husband, photographer Larry Tarr, was captivated by his sister-in-law's beauty. He took several portraits. In one, Ava's face emerged from the darkness in close-up. She wore a straw hat with ribbons, and her gaze was strange, a mix of childlike innocence and ancient, heavy, feminine wisdom. Larry displayed this photo in his Fifth Avenue studio window. That's when chance stepped in. Barney Doohan, an MGM legal department employee and part-time talent scout, was on his way to a party. He saw the photo and froze. Later, he admitted his first thought wasn't, "Oh, a new star for the studio," but "I need this girl's phone number to ask her out." He was sure she was a professional model. When he stormed into the studio demanding contact info, he was told, "She's our relative from North Carolina, and she doesn't have a phone." Driven by his hunter's instinct, Doohan insisted the photo be sent to the studio office. He didn't know he was setting in motion a machine that would grind this girl's fate. When Ava was called for her first screen test at MGM's New York office, the disaster was evident in seconds. The cameraman sat her in front of the camera and asked, "Tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you from? How old are you?" Ava opened her mouth. Out came that impossible, thick, syrupy, hillbilly accent. She swallowed endings, stretched vowels, used tobacco plantation slang. To the refined producers, it sounded like a beautiful swan suddenly quacking. "My God," whispered one of the assistants. "She can't speak. It's over." In the era of talkies, diction was everything. Actresses learned to speak with a transatlantic accent, an artificial dialect that sounded aristocratic and clear. Ava's speech was a defect. The cameraman, realizing sound would kill the impression, made a brilliant decision. He commanded, "Stay silent, not a word. Just look at the lens. Turn, take the flowers, put the flowers down, smile. Now don't smile." The film was sent to Hollywood to Mayer himself. The studio boss watched this silent film in complete silence. On screen was a girl doing nothing. She simply existed. But the camera loved her like it hadn't loved anyone since Greta Garbo. Her face radiated light. Her eyes held a mystery. Mayer delivered a verdict that became legendary. "She can't act. She can't talk. She's stunning. Sign her." They offered her a standard slave contract, $50 a week. For the daughter of a bankrupt farmer, it was a fortune. Ava, who planned to become a secretary and type 100 words a minute, couldn't believe her ears. She signed the papers without reading. As soon as Ava arrived in Los Angeles, accompanied by her sister, as her mother wouldn't let her go alone to the city of sin, the studio set about correcting the mistake. They hired the best speech coach, Gertrude Fogler. The task was simple: kill the South in her voice. Ava spent hours in front of a mirror, repeating tongue twisters, learning to open her mouth properly, breaking her tongue. She hated it. It felt like they were forcing her to betray her roots. They hired etiquette coaches to teach her how to walk, sit, hold a glass. Makeup artists spent hours working on her face, finding the best angles. They discovered she had a small dimple on her chin, called an angel's kiss, and decided to highlight it. But the worst was happening inside. Ava felt like an imposter. Around her were professional actresses, theater school graduates, and she was just a pretty girl from Grabtown who got lucky. The studio treated her like an expensive thoroughbred horse. She was examined, measured, evaluated, but no one asked what she thought. In the first 5 years, she appeared in 15 films, but in most, she didn't even have a name in the credits. She was girl in car, girl at table, waitress. It was here, in these endless MGM corridors, that her hatred for the profession was born. She saw the underbelly of the dream factory: cynicism, body trading, hypocrisy. She realized she was hired not for talent, but as a beautiful piece of furniture. In response to this humiliation, rebellion awoke in her. She began behaving in ways furniture shouldn't. She drank with stagehands. She swore when her heel broke. She refused to kowtow to producers. The studio thought they bought a doll, but inside the doll was a ticking time bomb, and the fuse was already lit. Soon it became clear that the studio walls were too tight for her temperament. Ava sought an outlet for her energy, and she found it where many women before and after her did: in men. But Ava wasn't looking for patrons. She sought equals. Her first marriage was a sensation. She married the biggest star of the time, a man shorter than her, but whose ego was bigger than the entire MGM studio: Mickey Rooney. This marriage was the first act of her war for independence, disguised as a honeymoon. Act 3, Frank Sinatra, Love Like a Street Fight. We're breaking the timeline to jump straight to the pivotal moment in her life. Up until now, we've seen the birth of Ava, the star. Now we witness the birth of Ava, the legend. Her affair with Frank Sinatra wasn't just another tabloid headline. It was a nuclear blast, the fallout of which shadowed them both for the rest of their lives. The 20th century had its share of iconic couples, but none destroyed each other with such passion and flair. This matters because it was in this relationship that Ava Gardner fully grasped her power. She met a man who was an idol to millions, the voice of America, and brought him to his knees. Not with feminine wiles, but with her raw, terrifying identity. They met at a party in Palm Springs in '48. Ava was already famous, but still a free spirit. Frank was married to Nancy, the good Italian wife, and his career was stalling. Their attraction wasn't romantic, it was chemical. They were mirror images of each other. Both drank enough to land any other person in the ER. Both suffered from insomnia and hated being alone. Both had tempers that could ignite insanity. Ava said, "Frank is me in pants, only he weighs 100 pounds and packs more rage." When they got together, it was like locking two wildcats in a room. The sex was explosive, the fights deadly. To grasp the toxicity of this love, you need to dissect specific scenes. These weren't just kitchen fights. This was Grand Guignol. One of the most terrifying nights happened at the Hampshire House Hotel in New York. Frank and Ava had been drinking for hours. The argument flared over something trivial, a glance thrown at someone, or an old grudge. Ava, tired of the shouting, stood up and said she was leaving, for good. Frank went into hysterics. He grabbed a gun, he often carried one, playing the gangster, pressed it to his temple and screamed, "I'll kill myself if you walk out." Ava didn't believe him. She knew his flair for the dramatic. She kept packing. Then Frank pulled the trigger. The blast in the confined space was deafening. Ava froze, convinced he was dead. She turned. Frank lay on the bed, face buried in the pillow. She rushed to him, hands shaking as she turned his body, and saw he was alive. He'd shot the mattress inches from his hip. In that moment, something inside her died. Instead of relief, she felt icy contempt. "You're pathetic, Francis," she said. When Ava flew to Kenya to shoot Mogambo with Clark Gable, Sinatra lost his mind with jealousy. He was sure Ava was sleeping with Gable, though Gable was in mourning and not interested in women at the time. Frank flew to Africa. He looked terrible, thin, exhausted, voiceless. He brought crates of Coca-Cola, afraid to drink a local water, and his paranoia. Instead of enjoying the safari, he staged scenes in the tent, accusing Ava of every sin. One evening, Ava found Frank on the floor of their bungalow. He'd overdosed on sleeping pills. Another suicide ploy. Ava didn't call doctors to avoid scandal. She pried his mouth open, forced salt water down his throat, and dragged him back from the brink, cursing like a sailor. But the most dramatic moment was her second pregnancy by Frank. She knew this child would be the end of her freedom and the start of hell. Frank was broke, his career had tanked, and she was footing all the bills. Ava made her decision instantly. She flew to London. Frank begged her to keep the child. He sang to her, cried, knelt. But Ava saw the situation clearly, with that farm girl toughness. "Frank, we can't even take care of ourselves. We drink, we fight, we live in hotels. A child in this chaos would just die. I'm not bringing a hostage into this world." She had an abortion. When she woke from anesthesia, Frank was there. He was sobbing. Ava didn't shed a tear. She paid for the operation herself. It was an act of ultimate mercy, not letting a new life start in hell. Sinatra never forgave her for the abortion or her strength. He was used to women depending on him. Ava depended only on her demons. Their marriage ended when Ava realized she'd become his mommy, his lifeline, and his punching bag all at once. She used her influence to land him the role in From Here to Eternity, the role of Maggio. The studio didn't want a washed-up Sinatra. Ava issued an ultimatum. Frank got the part, won an Oscar, reclaimed his fame, and as soon as he was king again, Ava left. She'd completed her mission. She saved him but burned herself to ashes in the process. But where did she get that steel, almost masculine toughness? Why didn't she break under Sinatra's pressure like others did? The answer lies in her past. Before Frank, there were two other men who tried to tame her. They unknowingly forged the armor that Frank Sinatra later shattered his head against. We're going back to see Ava Gardner's Survival School. Act 4. Taming. Mickey Rooney and Artie Shaw. Before she became the Ava who could smash a bottle over a gangster's head and make Frank Sinatra weep, she endured two marriages meant to break her. Instead, they forged her. This was her elementary school of cynicism. In the early 40s, Ava was the perfect target. She was young, just 19, stunningly beautiful, and to men, seemingly empty. A blank page ready for any script. Two completely different men, Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's box office king and eternal teenager, and Artie Shaw, a brooding intellectual and jazz genius, made the same fatal mistake. They saw her as clay. They wanted to be Pygmalions, but they forgot to check the material. It wasn't clay, it was granite. Their failure explains why Ava Gardner became disillusioned with marriage. She realized a harsh truth. Men weren't looking for a partner in her. They wanted a mirror to reflect their own greatness. First husband, Mickey Rooney. Picture this pair. Mickey Rooney was the world's #1 superstar, the face of the Andy Hardy franchise, the nation's darling, the embodiment of American energy. He was short, barely reaching Ava's shoulder, loud, brash, and incredibly wealthy. Ava was a nobody, a contract girl earning $50, still shy about her accent. To Rooney, she was a trophy, the priciest toy in the store he could afford. He courted her with bulldozer force, called her 20 times a day, sent bouquets too big for her tiny apartment. Ava gave in, not out of love, but confusion. She thought this was what fairy tales looked like. Second husband, Artie Shaw. A complete contrast. Artie Shaw was an intellectual snob. He despised Hollywood, though he took its money, hated fans, and saw himself as an unrecognized genius. To Shaw, Ava was a pupil, a wild thing to be civilized. He saw her as a beautiful animal. Yes, that term existed before ad men, needing to be taught to think. Marriage to Mickey Rooney was Ava's vaccine against illusions. The first wedding night shattered everything. Instead of the romance and passion a 19-year-old dreams of, Mickey took her to a hotel room, pecked her on the cheek, and went off to play cards with friends. Ava was left alone, in bridal lingerie, in an empty room, listening to the radio. That was the essence of their relationship. Rooney paraded her at parties, flaunted her beauty, look at those legs, but cared nothing for her soul. He cheated left and right, confident the country girl wouldn't leave. But Ava was proud. She didn't throw fits. She simply filed for divorce. MGM was furious. How dare she dump America's sweetheart? Producers threatened to destroy her career. Ava replied, "I don't care. I won't be furniture." She refused alimony, took not a cent from Rooney, so no one could say she married for money. She left the marriage with what she came in with, her pride and a suitcase of clothes. With Artie Shaw, the violence was subtler. It was psychological sadism. Artie was ashamed of her. When they visited the intellectual elite, he'd kick her under the table if she said something stupid. He gave her a reading list. Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Dostoevsky's The Idiot, Karl Marx's works. He made her read these dense texts, then quizzed her in front of others, relishing her confusion. "You're beautiful but empty," he'd tell her. Ava, with her imposter syndrome, believed him. She cried, read at night with a dictionary, tried to become worthy. She even took university courses to boost her IQ. But one day, she'd had enough. She realized Artie wasn't teaching her. He was asserting himself at her expense. He hated himself and took it out on her. One fine day, she closed a Dostoevsky book, poured herself a glass of whiskey, and said, "Screw you, Artie," and left. These two marriages made her the Ava we know. Mickey Rooney taught her that fame and money don't make a man. Artie Shaw taught her that even the smartest people can be cruel bastards. Artie Shaw unwittingly gave her a weapon. He made her read. Ava Gardner became a well-read, smart woman with a keen understanding of people. But because of the trauma Shaw inflicted, she hid her intelligence for life. It was safer to play simple than face another exam. After divorcing Shaw, she uttered a phrase that became her life credo. "I'd rather be alone than with someone who wants to change me. I am who I am. Like it, take it. Don't like it, go to hell." By the late 40s, Ava was free, smart, cynical, and incredibly beautiful. Hollywood realized attempts to make her a good girl had failed. This energy needed a new direction. If she didn't want to be a lady, let her be a predator. The studio decided to go all in and created an image for her that was insulting, yet brilliant. They called her an animal. And to many surprise, Ava took up the challenge. Act 5. The most beautiful animal. Marketing or insult. By the early 50s, Hollywood faced a real problem. They couldn't figure out where Ava Gardner fit. The typecasting system was rigid. Need an ice queen? Call Grace Kelly. Need a vulnerable blonde? Call Marilyn Monroe. Need innocent purity? Call Audrey Hepburn. Ava Gardner didn't fit any mold. Too earthy for a lady, too fierce for a victim, too sinful for a saint. She radiated danger. Her allure wasn't playful, promising pleasure, but heavy, promising trouble. To sell this unique, intimidating magnetism to the masses, studio marketers crafted the most controversial, cynical, yet brilliantly accurate slogan in cinema history. They didn't call her a woman, they called her the most beautiful animal in the world. This mattered because it marked a point of no return. On one hand, it represented the peak of objectification, denying a person a soul, reducing them to instincts. On the other, this animal status offered Ava paradoxical freedom. Animals don't follow etiquette, animals don't lie, and animals bite when they're hurt. In '54, The Barefoot Contessa hit theaters. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz wrote the script, inspired, though he denied it, by Ava's life. The story followed a dancer from the slums who becomes a movie star, but despises the phoniness of high society, ultimately dying because she stays true to her wild nature. The film's ad campaign was aggressive. Posters screamed, "The most beautiful animal in the world." Ava Gardner was furious. "I'm not an animal. I have a heart, I have a brain, and I feel pain," she yelled at her agents. But the public took the bait. Audiences flocked to theaters not for the acting. They came to see a predator caged on screen. It was a deal. We pay to safely watch a woman who, in real life, would destroy us in 5 minutes. The best proof that the marketers weren't lying about her nature came during the filming of Mogambo. The studio sent the crew to Africa, Kenya, and Uganda. No sound stages, no green screens. Real heat, real flies, real wild animals. On set, two stars collided, Ava Gardner and Grace Kelly. It was a clash of worlds. Grace Kelly, future Princess of Monaco, embodied civilization. She suffered in the heat, feared infections, demanded boiled water for washing, and constantly adjusted her flawless makeup. She was a hothouse flower suddenly without air conditioning. Ava Gardner, on the other hand, thrived. Africa made sense to her. It reminded her of her childhood on a farm, only bigger. She walked barefoot on the scorching red earth. She bathed in a barrel of rainwater, unashamed of her nudity. She drank gin with the crew, sitting on equipment crates. When an elephant wrecked the set, Grace Kelly nearly fainted, while Ava laughed and said, "Now that's a guy." The film's director, the legendary John Ford, was known for his tyranny. He hated actors, seeing them as spoiled children. He drove Grace Kelly to tears with his criticisms. But with Ava, he formed a strange, rough friendship. One day, Ford barked an order at her across the set. Ava didn't flinch. She put her hands on her hips and barked back with such profanity that even the camel drivers fell silent. Ford smirked. He respected strength. He realized this woman was cut from the same cloth as him. On screen, this animal presence was hypnotic. In scenes with Clark Gable, Ava didn't use typical feminine wiles. She didn't bat her lashes. She stared straight. She moved lazily, like a lioness, full, but ready to kill at any moment. Critics who usually panned her had to admit, Gardner doesn't play passion, she is passion. She fills the screen with a physical presence that makes the theater feel hot. The insulting title, Animal, became her shield. Ava understood the rules of the game. If you think I'm a wild creature, fine. Then I don't have to pretend to be a lady. Ladies don't drink whiskey from the bottle. Animals do. Ladies don't sleep with bullfighters. Animals sleep with whoever they want. Ladies smile at producers. Animals bare their teeth. She turned the insult into an indulgence. The animal status became her ticket to a world of absolute freedom, where ladies were barred. Ava realized if Hollywood denied her a soul, she didn't owe them hers. She'd sell them only her looks, but her inner life she'd lock away, tossing the key into the ocean. But the rare beast status had a dangerous side. Rare beasts attract the richest collectors. In Ava's life appeared a man who thought his money could buy this living exhibit and lock it in a gilded cage. The richest, most eccentric, and most insane billionaire in America, Howard Hughes. He thought he was buying a beautiful woman. He didn't know he was buying a ticket to hell. Act 6. Taming the Billionaire, Howard Hughes. In the power hierarchy of mid-20th century America, Howard Hughes stood above the president. He owned airlines, movie studios, oil rigs, and half of Las Vegas. For any actress, catching Hughes's eye felt like winning the lottery. Private jets, endless diamonds from Tiffany's, and total protection. Turning Hughes down was madness. Doing it rudely spelled career suicide. Ava Gardner was the only woman who dealt with Hughes, not just as an equal, but from a position of strength. Their strange, painful bond lasted 20 years. It wasn't love, it was a war of obsessions. Hughes, plagued by severe OCD and a mania for control, wanted to lock Ava in a sterile box. Ava, obsessed with freedom, wanted to live, breathe, drink, and make mistakes. This conflict is crucial because it shows Ava Gardner couldn't be bought, not even for all the money in the world. Hughes didn't court her. He laid siege to a fortress. He put Ava under total surveillance. His private detectives, often ex-FBI agents, camped in the bushes outside her house 24/7. They filed detailed reports. When she left, when she returned, who she talked to, how many bottles of champagne she bought. He tapped her phone. Bugs hid in her home. Ava knew. And her reaction was pure Gardner. Instead of fear, she mocked. Knowing she was being listened to, she'd approach the suspected bug and loudly, clearly tell Hughes exactly where he could go, using the dirtiest curses she knew from childhood. She used his planes, accepted his gifts, which she called compensation for moral damage, but openly slept with other men. For Hughes, who saw people as price-tagged commodities, this was incomprehensible. Why did the money equals loyalty scheme fail? Because Ava didn't see diamonds as payment. She saw them as tribute. A vassal pays a queen just for the privilege of being near. The climax of this war became a Hollywood legend, proof of her fearlessness. It happened in Ava's home. Hughes, losing patience over her latest affair, possibly with Sinatra, showed up to confront her. He started yelling. He, used to everyone trembling before him, made a fatal mistake. He tried to use physical force. He grabbed Ava, trying to hold her. At that moment, it wasn't a Hollywood star that awoke in Ava, but the farmer's daughter, Jonas Gardner's child. She didn't cry. She didn't call the cops. She silently grabbed a heavy bronze ashtray from the table. Some say a marble statue, but the essence is the same. It was heavy and blunt. And with a swing, pouring all her fury from years of surveillance and control into the blow, she struck the billionaire on the head. The sound was dull and terrifying. Howard Hughes, the man feared by senators and generals, collapsed onto the carpet like a sack of sand. Blood pooled on the floor. He lost consciousness. What did Ava do? She didn't panic. She didn't rush to perform CPR. She looked at the sprawled body and, legend has it, calmly said, "Serves you right, you son of a bitch." The staff was horrified. "Miss Gardner, you've killed Mr. Hughes. We'll all be jailed." But Hughes survived. And most astonishingly, he didn't sue. He didn't destroy her. On the contrary, after this incident, his respect and obsession for her only grew. He realized this woman couldn't be broken by force. The ashtray blow was her declaration of independence. She physically proved, "My body is my territory. Cross the line and you'll get a bullet, or bronze, to the head." Many biographers accuse Ava of being mercenary as she continued to associate with Hughes and take his money. But the psychology here is subtler. Hughes was a pathological germaphobe. Ava was earthy, dirty in his eyes, alive. He was drawn to her as a source of life he lacked in his sterile world. Ava saw in Hughes the only person whose madness matched her own. They were two monsters who understood each other without words. But she refused to sleep with the monster. She took his money to save those she truly loved, like paying off Sinatra's debts, but never gave up her freedom in return. However, living in a constant state of war takes its toll. Hollywood suffocated her with hypocrisy, Sinatra with jealousy, Hughes with control. Ava Gardner began to suffocate. She needed air. She needed a place where passion wasn't a sin and death wasn't taboo. And she found it, a pariah country. A place where blood spills on the sand to applause, where wine is cheaper than water, and where men stare down bulls, not producers. In the mid-50s, Ava Gardner did the unthinkable. She left Hollywood and fled to Francisco Franco's Spain. Act 7, Spanish Escape. Hemingway, Matadors, and Anarchy. The escape to Spain marked a pivotal plot twist. Actresses of Ava Gardner's caliber didn't simply abandon Hollywood at the height of their fame. They bought mansions in Beverly Hills, clinging to their contracts like lifelines. But Ava? She fled to Madrid, to a country under a harsh dictatorship, poor, devoutly Catholic, and cut off from the world. Why? Because paradoxically, in Franco's Spain, Ava found her personal anarchy. In Hollywood, freedom was merely a slogan, while behind the scenes, moral control reigned supreme, the infamous Hays Code. But in Spain, the nightlife pulsed with genuine passion. Her Spanish period became legendary. Ava settled in Madrid, living a lifestyle that would have killed an ordinary person in a month. She went to bed at dawn, woke up after sunset. Her entourage didn't consist of agents and publicists, but gypsies, flamenco dancers, matadors, and outcasts of every stripe. Her neighbor in the upscale district was the exiled Argentine dictator, Juan Perón. He despised Ava. Why? Because her balcony parties blared so loudly that Perón, a man who once ruled a country, couldn't sleep and would hurl curses over the fence. Ava would shout back, calling him a fascist and a bore. In Madrid, she discovered her ideal spiritual father, Ernest Hemingway. Two broken titans, a writer fearing he'd lost his touch, and an actress fearing she'd lost her youth. Hemingway called her daughter. Ava called him Papa. They could sit in a bar for hours, silently draining bottles. Hemingway taught her the intricacies of bullfighting. He saw in her the heroine of his books, a woman who takes a punch and doesn't whine. The apex of her Spanish life was her obsession with matadors. Hollywood actresses dated actors who played heroes. Ava chose men who were heroes. Her affair with the legendary matador Luis Miguel Dominguin became a worldwide scandal. Bullfighting became her drug. She sat in the front row, inhaling the scent of death, dust, and blood. She felt alive only where the risk was real. Dominguin once told her a brutal truth. "Ava, you're like a bull yourself. You charge at the red cape, not realizing there's a sword behind it." It was in Spain that an incident occurred which could have ended her career. During a ranch visit, one version says a horse threw her, another says a bull gored her, a third says glass cut her. Ava received a deep cut on her cheek. For an actress, her face is her fortune. The studio panicked. "The face is ruined." Ava just laughed. She refused plastic surgery for a long time. She liked the scar. It was real. It was proof she was part of life, not merely watching it from a limousine window. Spain gave her what Hollywood couldn't, the right to self-destruction without hypocrisy. The American press wrote about her fall, her reckless affairs, but the Spaniards adored her. They called her La Gardner. To them, she was relatable, a woman of nature, a woman of fire. But behind this eternal fiesta lay a deep void. Ava drank and danced the nights away, not because she was having fun. She was running from silence. In silence, her greatest fear returned. "I'm nobody, just a pretty shell." Yet even Spanish wine couldn't drown out reality. She needed to work. Ironically, during her downfall, she delivered her best, most powerful performances. She headed to Mexico, to the jungles of Puerto Vallarta, to film The Night of the Iguana. And what transpired on that set eclipsed any Hollywood script. It was Apocalypse Now, played out against a tropical paradise backdrop. Act 8, Hell in Paradise, 1963. The Night of the Iguana. This wasn't just a film shoot, it was a survival experiment. Director John Huston, Ava's old friend and drinking buddy, chose to adapt Tennessee Williams' play in the wildest place he could find, a fishing village in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Back then, no hotels existed. Electricity flickered, and the jungle teemed with iguanas and scorpions. Into this arena, Huston tossed the most explosive cast in history. Richard Burton, brilliant British actor with a scandalous affair with Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor, who wasn't in the film but flew in to keep an eye on Burton, terrified Ava would steal him away. Ava Gardner, over 40, drinking more than Burton, and couldn't care less about Taylor's jealousy. The world's press flocked to Mexico, expecting a battle of the titans. Paparazzi perched in trees. Everyone waited for Ava and Liz to tear each other's hair out. But reality, as always in Ava's life, surpassed any gossip. The role of Maxine Falk, the owner of a cheap hotel, vulgar, sensual, lonely, and incredibly alive, became the pinnacle of Ava's career. Why? Because Maxine was Ava, 10 years down the line. She didn't need to learn the part. She just had to let the camera see her wrinkles, her fatigue, and her insatiable thirst for life. The set's atmosphere stifled in every sense. Humidity at 100%, heat over 100 degrees, swarms of insects. While Elizabeth Taylor demanded her favorite chili and champagne flown in from the States and threw jealous fits at Burton, Ava found more interesting company. She befriended the Beach Boys, local Mexican guys who did water skiing and boat maintenance. They were simple, non-English-speaking lads, but Ava didn't need words. Every evening after filming, while Burton and Taylor got drunk in their bungalow, discussing Shakespeare and diamonds, Ava hit the beach. Picture this, a Hollywood goddess, in a simple shirt, barefoot, racing on water skis across the Pacific waves, surrounded by sun-kissed Mexican teens. One day, an incident occurred. Ava, heavily intoxicated, tequila flowing like water, decided to ski. The boat jerked forward too fast. Ava lost her balance and crashed into the water at full speed. The rope went taut, dragging her across the ocean surface for several dozen yards before the driver noticed something was wrong and killed the engine. The entire crew on shore froze in horror. It was an insurance agent's nightmare, the lead star possibly injured or drowned. But when the boat reached her, Ava surfaced, sputtering saltwater, and burst into laughter. Her swimsuit was askew, her hair like seaweed, but her laughter was so infectious that within a minute, the whole beach was laughing. "Pour me another tequila, damn it, and let's go again," she shouted. This was her victory over Elizabeth Taylor. Liz was the queen of drama and diamonds. Ava was the queen of life. The local Mexicans worshipped her not because she was a star, but because she was macha, a woman with a warrior's spirit. On screen, this ease had a stunning effect. Ava's Maxine Falk was a woman who knew her beauty was fading, but wasn't ashamed of it. There's a scene where she dances with the Beach Boys, playing maracas. Look at her face in that moment. There's no acting. There's Ava dancing just as she did in Madrid taverns. Richard Burton, who initially treated her condescendingly as just a pretty face, was astounded. Later he wrote in his diary, "She didn't play by the rules. She just lived on camera so intensely that next to her, we all seemed like wooden dolls." The Night of the Iguana became her swan song. Critics, who had called her talentless for years, overwhelmed with praise. But Ava? She didn't even attend the premiere. While Hollywood applauded, she was already packing her bags for London. She knew what others didn't see. This film wasn't the start of a new chapter, but a farewell. She had captured her fading on film and no longer wanted the world to watch the most beautiful animal age. Act 9, Imposter Syndrome, the Dusk of Beauty. We're stepping into the most psychologically grueling chapter. For a woman whose only currency was her looks, she can't act, she's just pretty. Aging isn't a natural process, it's bankruptcy. Ava Gardner saw her face as a business asset that began to depreciate. Her move to London in the late 60s wasn't just a change of address. It was an attempt to hide the crumbling temple from prying eyes. Ava settled into an apartment in Kensington. London suited her perfectly, gray, rainy, reserved. Here, no one rushed at her on the street with shouts, but her main enemy became the mirrors. Biographers say her London apartment had very specific lighting, dim lamps, heavy curtains. She created perpetual twilight. She kept acting in the 70s, The Bluebird, The Cassandra Crossing, Earthquake, but only for the money. She needed to fund her lifestyle. Every day on set tortured her. She drove the cameramen crazy with demands. Use filters, soften the light, no close-ups. She saw every new millimeter of wrinkles and loathed it. In '86, disaster struck. Ava suffered 2 strokes. The aftermath devastated a style icon. Part of her face paralyzed, a twisted mouth, speech problems. For Ava, it was the end of the world. She became a recluse. She walked her corgi named Morgan only early in the morning or late at night, wrapped in scarves and wearing huge dark glasses. If she spotted someone familiar on the street, she'd cross to the other side or hide in a taxi. "I don't want them to see me like this. Let them remember me as Ava from The Killers," she told her housekeeper Carmen. This wasn't vanity, it was pride. She understood the laws of showbiz. Once a lion weakens, the jackals, the press, come to finish it off. She decided to deny them that pleasure. Act 10, The Memoir's Secret. We're nearing the end, and here comes the biggest twist, revealing Ava Gardner's true nobility. In the late 80s, Ava found herself in a financial mess. Stroke treatments cost a fortune. Her savings vanished. A way out appeared. Write an autobiography. Publishers dangled $1 million for the dirty details on Sinatra, Hughes, Rooney, and the Hollywood elite. $1 million would solve all her problems. Ava hired British journalist Peter Evans to help pen the book. They got to work. Ava, who never knew how to lie, began spilling everything. She talked about abortions, about Mickey Rooney's violence, Howard Hughes's oddities, the wild fights with Sinatra. Evans was thrilled. The material was explosive, a bestseller that would blow the market apart. But as they worked, Ava grew darker. One night she called Evans. "I can't do it, Peter," she slurred, a mix of stroke and booze. "What can't you do, Ava?" "I can't release this book." She realized this truth would hurt those she loved, especially Frank Sinatra. Frank was alive, married to Barbara, living his life. Publishing tales of abortions and his suicidal tendencies would humiliate him. Peter Evans tried to convince her. "Ava, you need the money. It's your story, you have the right." But Ava Gardner, white trash from North Carolina, had a code of honor many aristocrats lacked. "I won't sell my ghosts," she snapped. "I'd rather die broke than betray Frank." She tore up the contract, walked away from $1 million when she needed it like air. The book Ava, My Story, only came out after her death, heavily cut and softened. But those drafts, those talks with Evans, stood as proof of her unwavering loyalty. She protected Sinatra, even at the cost of her own welfare. And right then, as if sensing her sacrifice, Frank Sinatra stepped in. He learned of her illness and money woes. He asked no questions. He just started paying the bills. A special medical plane from the States to get her to the best doctors? Paid. Round-the-clock nurses? Paid. Ava knew who was behind it. They barely saw each other, but their bond across the ocean was stronger than any marriage. January 25th, 1990. London. Rain. Ava Gardner lay in bed, her housekeeper Carmen and her dog by her side. She stared out the window at the gray sky. Her whole life, from tobacco fields to royal receptions, flashed before her eyes. She turned to Carmen and spoke her last words, words that put an end to her war with the world. "I'm so tired," she whispered. Ava Gardner's heart stopped. She was 67. The news of her death shook the world, but it hit one man in Los Angeles the hardest. When Frank Sinatra heard Ava was gone, his daughter said he turned black with grief. He couldn't attend the funeral. He knew he couldn't handle the press, and Barbara was against it. But he sent a wreath. A simple card read, "With love, Francis." Ava wished to be buried not in Hollywood, among the stars, but back home in Smithfield, North Carolina, next to her parents. The circle closed. The girl who ran from the farm to conquer the world returned to her roots, proving she never sold her soul. Ava Gardner's story isn't just an actress's tale. It's a manual on keeping your identity under crushing pressure. She showed you can be an animal and have more honor than a lady. She showed you can think you're talentless and become an icon. She showed real love isn't holding hands for the camera, but paying each other's bills, even oceans apart. Ava Gardner beat the system because the system had no tool to break her. She was too real for a world of illusions. And that's why decades later, we still look at her photos and feel that charge. Reality always trumps expectations. And Ava Gardner was the most beautiful reality Hollywood ever had. Ava Gardner chose the honest path. She told Hollywood to go to hell to keep her soul. She was a warrior who dropped the sword and walked into the sunset. But in that same Hollywood, in those same corridors, there was another woman. A woman who made the opposite choice. She didn't fight the system, she decided to buy it. We think of her as a funny, clumsy housewife, A clown always in ridiculous situations, but it was the most brilliant disguise in showbiz history. While Ava Gardner smashed ashtrays over billionaires' heads, this funny redhead quietly and methodically took control of the machines, cameras, and money. Ava was a rebel. Lucille Ball became the Trojan horse. She wore the mask of the dumb wife to lull the men to sleep and built an empire that forever changed television. How did a clown become the most ruthless capitalist of the era? And why did she pay a price even more terrifying than Ava Gardner's? Find out the truth about Lucille Ball right now.